Hi, my name is Lars Gyllenhaal and I'm an author working with military history. This is the latest book I've written with Carl Gunnar Norén about the long-range desert group. And today I am going to talk about the tank that I'm standing in front of, the Strv 103. I had the privilege of serving on it in 1988 to 89. During 15 months. So I'm going to give you a user perspective from the 1980s. So let's start with the firepower. The main gun was actually the same as in the Centurion tank, a 10.5 centimeter gun, just 1 meter longer than the Centurion's gun. And this was due to the fact of the turretless design. That it could be made longer, and this was quite important because it improved the firepower, the range and the velocity of the rounds. So we could pierce enemy vehicles at longer distances and with greater effect. And we were quite pleased with the automatic loader. For one, it of course made things easier, not having a loader, and it was very fast. And we never had any problems with the auto loader. It was always working very well, and theoretically it could fire 17 rounds per minute. That's, I understand, still today unsurpassed. To conclude my experience of the firepower of the Strv 103 or S-Tank, through this hatch the empty shell cases were ejected. In other words, it was not a very good place to stand when the gun was firing, because they would get ejected with quite high rate, and of course if you were hit by one of these, you could be quite badly hurt. The hatches below here are for adding ammunition to the tank, and the total amount of rounds was 50, and this was a very smart place for the ammunition, because it was very safe. If you were hit by an enemy tank, the risk for the ammunition to be hit was very low, because first of all you had the frontal armor and you had the engines and the crew apartment, so this was a good place for the ammunition. And remember that one of the crew had as a speciality to drive backwards, so you could always have the frontal armor facing the enemy, and this sensitive place was thus never shown to the enemy. Let's talk about the Strv 103 mobility, and as you will notice, this tank is not very long, 9 meters, and that meant that the trench crossing ability was a bit limited compared to, for example, the Centurion tank, which was longer. This was a bit of a problem in South Sweden with lots of trenches. But up in the Arctic, where I served, I was serving on the northernmost armored battalion in Swedish Lapland. We didn't have so many trenches, but we did have a lot of snow. And in those conditions, we didn't have many problems with the short length of the vehicle. Speaking about the main wheels here, the road wheels, I would like to mention that they are the same as on the Centurion. So the gun and the road wheels are the same as on the Centurion. Going a bit further up, what about these jerry cans made of plastic? They are particular to the Strv 103C. On the B version, they were not present. And they have a dual purpose. The obvious purpose is to increase the amount of fuel that you have with you. But there was another purpose, and that is that they help protect the vehicle. And going a bit further up, what about these rods? Well, they're part of the amphibious ability of this vehicle, and that was probably the highlight of my service in the 80s, when we were allowed to erect the screen and cross a lake. That was a bit a nervous moment, I must say, because if you have a severe leak, you will go down rather quickly in the lake. My experience crossing a lake was something like this. It took something like an hour to erect the screen, and then you were sitting on top of it, on the screen, and in your hands you had two wires that were attached to the steering device. So it was a rather mechanical thing, and no one was allowed to be inside the tank or on top of it. Everyone was sitting on the rim of the flotation screen. And when you went down into the lake, it was a bit scary because first you were several meters up in the air because the screen was quite tall, and then you were sort of going down when you went into the water. It was rather steep, and then in the water the propulsion was from the tracks, and it was actually not too slow. My memory is that it went a bit faster than I thought. And then when we reached the other side of the lake, it started to, the tracks started to get a grip, and you felt how this beast suddenly was going up the side, the opposite side of the lake. And again, there was a rather steep angle. And finally, you were on solid ground, and you were away from the lake, and you felt, whew. This is where the tank commander was, and that was my role. And the tank commander had a machine gun of his own, in like a mini turret, which was very quick in traversing and functioned very well. And here you see a mount for the anti-aircraft role, but mostly we were using it in this ground role. And in addition to this one, we had two more machine guns over there in that box. They could, of course, not be traversed. They were like the main gun. They were fixed and were firing in the same direction as the main gun. This was much more useful, and it worked very well. And the optics were great. And here you have the smoke launchers. This is for illumination, for night fighting. And we actually never had time to use these, so I can't speak about them from my own experience. Let's talk about the engines. They were here in front and added to the protection of the crew compartment. We had the sloping armor, the ribs, and the engines all in front of us. And the engines were a diesel and a gas turbine. And all we had to do if we had a problem was to raise these heavy hatches here on each side of the main gun. And then we were told not to tinker ourselves with the engines. We never learned how to do any kind of engine repair because these were quite complicated things. So we just had to raise these heavy hatches and let the technicians come and solve the problem. One thing that we did do, though, on a daily basis was to open these plugs and check the levels of the liquids so that they were on the appropriate level. This was a bit of a problem. The exhaust from the gas turbine, you would have a very clear signature of the warm exhaust several meters up in the air, which is of course a big minus in a fighting situation where it's quite evident that a gas turbine is in the area. But we also used this as something of a bonus by placing cans here with sausages, so we would get fast food from this exhaust. Well, I think now is the time to talk about the crew compartment. One of the truly unique features of the S-tank was that a single person could fight with it. It was possible both for the gunner/driver and the tank commander to by himself drive and fight. This was thanks to the combined steering and firing device. So both of these persons could actually do everything necessary. But for having some kind of sustainable capability, you needed 3 people. Here, always facing backwards, was the rear driver, who was also the radio operator, and just a few centimeters away was the gunner/driver. And the situation when you were sitting inside was something similar to a crew in an aircraft, because you had no turret which sort of separated the crew. You were all 3 crew members were close to each other and not moving about, which is the situation when you have a turret. So you were more closely together. And now let's go down inside the tank. Right now I'm in the position of the gunner/driver. In peacetime it would be quite nice to have this hatch open, even if the optics were great. It's always nice to have the best possible view, and that's why you prefer to have the hatch open. But then you have to be careful that it's secured. If it's not secured, and if you stop suddenly, you will get this hatch here, and you can have a really bad accident. So you had to be very careful with this hatch. Welcome to the position of the gunner/driver. This is the combined firing and driving device. And it's a bit like the handlebars of a motorbike, and it's very, very easy to learn. It's almost like you learn by intuition. You don't need much of instruction to understand how it works. And in combination with the automatic gear shifting, it's a very user-friendly vehicle. And again, it's possible to both drive and fight with a single person. Well, sitting here in the S-tank fighting compartment, memories come back from the 80s. And one of the best memories I have is a sunny day when we had a crew member who had a freestyle, which was like a music player, and he was able to integrated with our helmets so that we could listen to music when we weren't using the radio. And one day we had this superb tape in the freestyle, and I remember very vividly listening to the theme from Top Gun sitting in this place. Well, was the S-Tank a good tank? My own experience of it was mainly positive. The hydropneumatic suspension made it a bit tricky to use. Not for us, the crew, but the technicians were often fixing things with the suspension. And some exercises, quite a few of our vehicles were out of action due to the suspension. So I think that was a problem, that even though it had been in service for a number of years, the suspension still caused problems. But what about the turretless aspect? Was that a big drawback? In the simulated fighting that I experienced, it was not a big issue. And in some duels that I participated in with lasers, we were quite successful against the Centurion opponents. So we experienced no big problems with the turretless design. And looking at this vehicle from the historical viewpoint, it's very interesting, of course, for its unique turretless design, but did it have any offspring, so to say? No. No one tried to do something similar. And doesn't that then prove that it was an unsuccessful idea? Well, I would say that it's quite evident that aspects of this vehicle have actually provided some important input in other vehicles. I'm thinking about the ammunition storage, for example, being at the back. That has been adopted by other tank designers around the world. And there are other features that have also influenced fighting vehicle design around the world. Let's finally talk about a Soviet aspect of this vehicle. It's just a few years ago that some photographs emerged, probably taken in the 1980s, that prove that the Soviet Union actually made a full-scale mock-up. Perhaps it was even a moving mock-up. We don't know for sure. It may have been able to move on its own propulsion, but we don't know that for sure. What is certain is that they did a lot of work to make a realistic-looking mock-up in the Soviet Union, and this is something we learned only a few years ago. During my service, we were absolutely ignorant of that, and also of the extra protection of the bars, the secret bars at the front. We had no idea that that wartime extra protection existed. It was very heavily a heavily guarded secret of this tank. For 15 months in 1988 to 1989, I was serving on this tank, and now you have some idea of what it was like, I hope. Thank you so much for watching.